Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather video for today, June 17th, 2024. We have lots to go over today, including a new invest area in the Atlantic to watch. So let's cut to the chase, starting off with the National Hurricane Center homepage updated as of 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, just to take a look at what's going on. Of course, we have Invest Area 91L, which is in the Bay of Campeche, and it is looking like this could potentially develop and have a high chance to become our first named storm of the hurricane season of 2024, that being Alberto. National Hurricane Center gives this a 70% chance of formation to occur. And then we also have another area of interest as well, although this has a much lower chance in the Bahamas. We're still watching this potentially for development, but really the focus is on the Bay of Campeche, where there's a huge, broad area of low pressure. It's once again what we call associated with our Central American gyre. Really quickly, though, in the Eastern Pacific, Invest 90E moved inland, and it's now enveloped in this general big, very big Central American gyre setup that we have, which is what's helping in terms of 91L's development. And just to take a look at a satellite shot of the Atlantic to really show you and put into perspective what is going on, and you could just see just how broad of an area that we're watching for development with this system. And I think this will be the main inhibiting factor if you want to ask me what the main issue with this system will be. Just look at how broad the circulation is. We have cloud cover extending all the way from Central America and the Eastern Pacific, as I mentioned before, with Invest 90E that we were tracking about a day or so. That's involved and kind of enveloped within this huge mess. And this will have its sort of effect on making it a little bit difficult for potentially this system 91L to be able to fully consolidate, especially as it moves northward in time before it gets to either the northern Mexican coastline or potentially even southern Texas. But regardless of what the issues will be, whether or not it does develop or not, and indeed become a tropical system, as we always say, you don't need a tropical system or a tropical storm to produce tropical storm-like impacts. You don't need a name, you don't need a specific designation, especially when it comes to flooding rains, because that's going to be a huge issue with this storm. I mean, especially given how much this cloud cover is encompassing portions of the Caribbean and Central America, and how it's basically going to last over this area for the next several days, regardless of whether this or not this becomes a named storm. I mean, we saw the issue we had last week in South Florida with Invest 90L, absolutely pummeling rain over portions of Miami, and generally South Florida, and they got over a foot of rain, and Invest 90L obviously didn't develop. So that's going to be the main issue we're watching. But it really is going to be, I think the main focus will be to see whether we get this huge area of very broad, clouds and thunderstorms to consolidate over one low pressure, and that's how we'll get this storm to develop. And you can see on the 850 millibar vorticity, you can just kind of see the broad scope of the system. And let me see if it's refreshed now to the 18Z since it's 2 o'clock. It's not yet, but you could generally get the idea. Look at the 850 millibar vorticity, and you notice just how broad this system is. We have vorticity kind of stretched out and kind of morphed together all across Central America and the Southern Gulf. And once again, this is all part of our Central American gyre setup that we have. And this is kind of expected. Central American gyres, once again, they're a pain in the butt in the you-know-what to deal with in terms of especially tracking and really being able to pinpoint whether or not we're actually going to get this to develop. We don't always get these kind of systems to develop. Sometimes they remain so broad that they're not even able to fully concentrate. But even when they do concentrate, they still remain broad, and you can see it. All of this vorticity here kind of just stretched out. But one thing I will say, though, atmospheric conditions are favorable. Obviously, the Gulf of Mexico is very warm. Temperatures, I think we reviewed it yesterday, that some of these temperatures in the Bay of Campeche are as warm as in the mid to upper 80s and low 90s in terms of sea surface temperatures. And if we look at the wind shear too, the upper level winds in the atmosphere, you could see right over the southern Gulf and in the general Central America region, notice the upper level winds are actually, for once, they're weak. And that's obviously a plus. That is a green light for development of the system. We don't really like to look at development where there are areas of very strong upper level winds, and the upper level winds in this region are weak. So that means that the system will be in the green light zone for potentially concentrating. It's really going to depend on the size and how much we're able to see off this vorticity kind of concentrate over one area of low pressure. And that's actually indeed what recon, because there's actually going to be recon that'll go into this system. I'm not sure if they're already going in now, but once they do go in, we'll get a little bit of a better idea to see where exactly we need to watch for the concentration of the low pressure to occur, and subsequently help development with this system happen. But wind shear is low. This generally has very warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf. I think the biggest issue, besides whether or not this will develop, as once again I mentioned before, it's really going to be the rain. And just really to put into perspective the kind of rain we're looking at, this is the Weather Prediction Center total rain forecast over the next 7 days. This is specifically looking at Texas, and not even Texas, but also portions of the Gulf Coast too, including portions of Louisiana, but especially southern Texas. Look at that. Some of those rain totals as much as over 10 inches of rain, so maybe some areas could see up to a foot of rain, even all the way down into Mexico and over. Generally, a majority of Texas will see heavy rain averaging out over the next week or so. And this is all going to come from this system. Once again, it's such a huge area, such lots of deep tropical moisture that's going to be associated with the system. So I think the biggest issue, regardless of whether or not this develops, will be the heavy rain. And it's not only Texas, though. You also see portions of northeastern Mexico, and not only that too, but the southern Gulf as well. This is the GFS forecast for the precipitation over the next week. I'm using the Weather Prediction Center for the United States, but for the GFS, I want to represent not just the United States, but also all of Central America too, because they're also part of the Atlantic, right? They're also part of the influence of this system. We got to give respect to everybody, right? But in Central America too, they're going to be dealing with lots of heavy rain. In fact, even with the influence of 90E, which is generally, once again, a part of this huge system, they're going to get lots of heavy rain, not just in Mexico, but I think portions of Guatemala too. And I think that's Nicaragua down there. They're getting lots of heavy rain, but especially over the Yucatan and over the Bay of Campeche, Mexico as well. You can see some of these totals averaging over 10 inches. I think even on the GFS, they're kind of indicating potentially over a foot of rain, even maybe 2 feet of rain in portions of Texas, and that's definitely going to result in some sort of flash flooding and issues like that too, which are all going to be associated with the system as well. So the biggest issue we need to watch for, regardless of whether or not this system develops, is definitely the flooding rain. And I really want to emphasize this because, as I always say, but I will say it again, heavy rains and flooding rains are the number one issue in terms of what kills people when a tropical cyclone makes development. All the hype goes into the category. It's category 5. It's 140, 50 miles an hour. But we really especially don't focus on things like storm surge or even just the pure rain that sometimes can come out of these systems. I mean, Harvey, for instance, stalled over Texas and brought as much as 60 inches of rain across portions of Houston, and that caused lots of damage as well, lots of flooding. And Harvey was the most costly storm to ever hit the United States, tied basically with Katrina, and that was from the flooding alone, not even from the fact that it made landfall as a major hurricane. So we're really going to have to watch the flooding issues as well with this storm, regardless of whether or not it develops. But just to kind of get an idea of how this exactly will play out, let's take a look at the GFS model. And you can see, as I mentioned before, the biggest thing about the storm is how broad and generally how big it remains in terms of its envelope of vorticity. And you can see that generally remains a thing on the GFS. This is about a day out from the initialization of the model, which is at 12Z, so roughly around 8 o'clock this morning. notice just how big this envelope of vorticity is over the southern Gulf, stretching all the way up from the Texas, near the Texas coastline. There's a pocket of vorticity, I guess, that tries to consolidate. That's at least what the GFS shows. And then there's kind of like this main low pressure area that remains more towards the Bay of Campeche. In general, it just remains a really broad system, and you could see that even as this moves inland over Mexico, this is hour 72, it generally remains broad. It definitely doesn't concentrate that much in terms of its area of vorticity. And then seems like, I guess, around by hour 72, I guess maybe into hour 84, so that's roughly 3 to 4 days out, it's already inland. So the GFS doesn't really develop much with this system after that, and then we kind of go out into time besides that up to hour 162, and then up to the next 7 days, it seems like the GFS tries to develop another storm, as I guess they kind of show that this general Central American gyre pattern remains after this storm. But that's besides our concern for right now. You can generally see this system, at least just to kind of put into perspective how broad this system will be. The GFS definitely keeps it broad, and maybe if this is not able to concentrate in time, this will probably just move into Mexico as a broad rainmaker, as it definitely seems like it will be regardless. So that's the GFS. Let's take a look at the European. This is the 60 European. And you can see too, they also keep the system very broad. I mean, just look at this, hour 48. There is definitely a closed low-level circulation, but as I'm showing you now, it's very big. Definitely not concentrated over one area. It's not like, let me go back to the GFS really quickly. It's definitely not in comparison to like this system over here, and I'm pointing this system out because it is that other low chance area that the National Hurricane Center has marked in the Bahamas. You notice that with this system, we have one small area of vorticity that is really round and concentrated in and of itself. This is what you would really look at a lot more when you're looking at something that looks very certain to develop, or at least it looks like a very clear-cut signal on the models. And this is kind of something that also is of another concern in itself that maybe we might need to watch. But you'll notice that the GFS keeps it weak up to 5 days. Maybe causes a concern for the Carolinas if this does indeed develop, but once again, the GFS keeps it weak, and it seems like the European even barely develops it as well. But the bottom line is, take a look. This is really quickly run through the European. They also keep the system weak. Moves it into the Bay of Campeche within the next 3 or 4 days, and I don't think they probably not really as anything that develops much. So I will say, whether or not this develops, and even if this does develop, it'll probably remain a very broad system. The biggest threat is rain, flash flooding, probably landslides or mudslides or whatever over portions of Central America especially. And just really quickly to kind of go over the intensity guidance, just if it's any consolation, the intensity guidance too, besides the SHIP model, although I think that's really something that a lot of people say not to really pay attention to the SHIPS model in this case, but the general other model consensus, most of them do indeed strengthen this to a tropical storm. So maybe most of these intensity guidance plots think that maybe we could indeed get this to become a tropical system. Maybe it'll just barely be a very broad, large encompassing sort of area tropical system. Definitely won't be anything pretty, although it's only June, so it doesn't really matter. But in general, it remains weak. We don't see anything substantial in terms of wind-wise out of this. Once again, the issue remains to be the rain. So that is the general sum up when it comes to 91L. If you're in Texas, or whether you're in Mexico, or wherever you're watching this from, I'd say the biggest issue you should pay attention to is the heavy rain. Definitely keep an eye on that. The winds are going to be gusty. Yes, we'll get 45, 50, maybe 60 mile per hour wind gusts, if this does indeed become a tropical system. But I'm not sure it'll be more than that. But always got to watch out, because once again, as I did say, flash flooding and floods, they really tend to be the biggest sort of damage causer when it comes to these systems besides the wind, especially with the wind now where it's only 45, 50, 60 miles per hour. That's obviously still substantial in its own way, but definitely not as substantial as flooding rains. So definitely keep that in mind when it comes to Invest 91L, which does seem like it may just maybe might be on track to become our first system of the hurricane season for 2024. With that being said, though, I'm going to end it off for today. Any more updates on the system, I'm going to post it on my Twitter account for the rest of the afternoon and evening. And then obviously we'll post again tomorrow, maybe discussing whether or not with what happens. Maybe we'll also do a live sort of video discussion too, so stay tuned for that. And if you're new to my channel, if you want to stay tuned for that, I really encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, especially subscribe, and share with family and friends as well. If you have any people concerned about the system in any of these areas that will be affected, especially in southern Mexico, definitely encourage you to send this video their way as well. With that being said, stay safe, have a blessed day, have a great day, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we'll talk again tomorrow.